The battle for Valeria Prime was over, and humanity's hope had been extinguished in a single crushing moment. The vast, ominous shadow of the alien queen loomed over the smoldering battlefield. Her iridescent carapace glimmered under the blood-red skies, her 6 arms crossed with regal menace. The human warrior who had dared to challenge her, the last defiant soldier in the face of insurmountable odds, lay on the charred ground, defeated but alive. His armor was shattered, his weapon discarded, and his spirit teetering on the brink of breaking. She approached him slowly, her movements a mixture of elegance and power. Her imposing frame was twice his height, and her alien physiology was as terrifying as it was majestic. The sharp, clawed feet left deep imprints in the dirt, and her piercing, bioluminescent eyes bore into him with an intensity that froze him in place. A strange, almost musical clicking escaped her mandibles as she studied her fallen prey. "Human warrior," she hissed, her voice a blend of alien clicks and unervingly clear speech, a testament to her species' superior intellect. "You fought well, but your kind's defiance ends here. You are mine now." The man, known as Commander Elias Marrow, groaned as he struggled to sit upright. Pain shot through his body, but he refused to look away from her. Even in defeat, he would not cower. "Kill me if you must," he spat through gritted teeth, his blue eyes blazing with defiance. "But I will never bow to you." The alien queen tilted her head, her expression unreadable but undeniably amused. "Kill you? No, little one. That would be a waste of such an intriguing creature. I have a better use for you." Her claws moved with surprising gentleness as she grabbed him by the collar of his torn armor and hoisted him effortlessly into the air. His legs dangled helplessly, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of crying out. Her gaze lingered on him for a long moment, as if savoring the moment of her triumph, before she turned and began walking toward her massive, organic fortress. It pulsed like a living thing, its alien architecture a grotesque blend of bone, sinew, and chitin. The fortress swallowed them whole, the entrance sealing behind them like the maw of some titanic beast. Inside, the air was thick with an otherworldly energy that hummed against Elias's skin. Strange, luminescent flora clung to the walls, casting the space in a haunting glow. He could hear the distant sounds of alien creatures scuttling in the shadows, their clicks and growls sending shivers down his spine. The queen carried him deep into the heart of the fortress, where a grand chamber awaited. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness, and at its center stood a throne-like structure carved from what appeared to be the bones of some colossal beast. She placed him on the ground before it, her towering figure casting a long shadow over him. "You will be my pet," she declared, her voice echoing through the chamber. "A symbol of my victory over your kind. You will serve me, obey me, and amuse me, or you will face a fate far worse than death." Elias clenched his fists, his pride warring with the crushing reality of his situation. "I am no one's pet," he growled. The queen let out a sound that might have been a laugh, though it carried an unsettling edge. "You will learn, human. In time, you will understand your place." She extended one of her clawed hands, and a strange, glowing collar materialized in her grasp. Its design was alien, intricate patterns etched into its surface that seemed to shift and pulse with a life of their own. Before Elias could react, she snapped it around his neck. The moment it locked into place, he felt a jolt of energy surge through him, sapping his strength and leaving him gasping for breath. "This collar will ensure your compliance," the queen explained, her tone almost playful. "It binds your will to mine. Resist, and you will suffer." Elias glared up at her, his defiance flickering but not extinguished. "You think this will break me?" "I do not need to break you," she replied, leaning down so her face was mere inches from his. Her alien features were both terrifying and strangely captivating. "I will mold you." And so began his new existence as the alien queen's pet. The days blurred together in a surreal haze as Elias was forced to navigate his bizarre new role. The queen treated him with a mixture of cruelty and curiosity, testing his limits and pushing him to the edge of his endurance. She would summon him to her throne room to serve as her companion during meetings with her alien subjects, a living reminder of her dominance over humanity. Other times, she would demand he entertain her with stories of Earth, her sharp mind probing his knowledge of human culture and history. Despite the humiliation, Elias refused to give her the satisfaction of complete submission. He answered her questions with clipped words, his tone laced with sarcasm whenever he dared. He endured her punishment silently, his jaw set and his gaze unwavering. His resistance only seemed to amuse her, and he couldn't decide if that was a blessing or a curse. As weeks turned into months, Elias began to notice subtle changes in their dynamic. The Queen's initial hostility softened into something more complex, an almost begrudging respect. She would linger longer during their conversations, her questions becoming more thoughtful and less probing. She even allowed him moments of solitude, a rare mercy in his confined existence. One evening, as they sat in the grand chamber, the Queen observed him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "You are different from the others of your kind," she said, her tone contemplative. Elias snorted. "I suppose that's your way of saying I'm stubborn." She ignored his sarcasm. "Your resilience intrigues me. Most would have broken by now, yet you persist." "Why?" He met her gaze, his blue eyes defiant but tinged with curiosity. "Because I refuse to let you win. No matter what you do, you can't take my humanity from me." The Queen tilted her head, a faint glimmer of what might have been admiration flickering in her eyes. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than I believed." Elias couldn't deny the strange connection that seemed to be forming between them. It was not friendship, far from it, but an understanding, a recognition of each other's strength. For all her cruelty, the Queen was not the mindless tyrant he had imagined. She was intelligent, calculating, and driven by a purpose he couldn't yet comprehend. As time wore on, Elias found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. He despised the Queen for what she had done to humanity, for the lives she had taken and the pain she had caused. But he couldn't ignore the moments of vulnerability she let slip, the glimpses of a being who carried the weight of her species on her shoulders. Their interactions became a dance of defiance and curiosity, hostility and reluctant camaraderie. The fortress, once a prison, began to feel like a strange, alien world of its own, full of secrets waiting to be unraveled. And though Elias's heart burned with the desire to escape, a part of him couldn't help but wonder if there was more to his captor, and her plans for him, than he had ever imagined. The days grew heavier as Elias adjusted to his strange new reality. Yet, despite the alien Queen's attempts to dominate him completely, their dynamic shifted in unexpected ways. Her towering presence was no longer just a symbol of fear but a constant reminder of the bizarre relationship that was evolving between them. Elias felt a gnawing confusion about his situation. Was it possible to hate someone and still feel connected? The Queen, whose name he had come to know as Xelthara, began including him in more of her private moments. At first, Elias thought it was another tactic to humiliate him, but over time, it became clear that her motives were more complicated. She would speak to him not as a defeated warrior, but as a companion, albeit one bound by a collar of submission. One evening, Xelthara summoned him to a high balcony overlooking the fortress. The view stretched out over the scarred remains of Valeria Prime, the land still glowing faintly from the battle that had razed it. The alien Queen stood motionless, her bioluminescent eyes fixed on the horizon. Elias approached cautiously, his collar pulsing faintly with the energy that reminded him he was still under her control. "You summoned me?" he asked, his voice as neutral as he could manage. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, Elias," she said, her voice softer than usual. "What did you fight for? When you faced me, when you charged into battle knowing you could not win, what was it that drove you?" He hesitated. The question was unexpected, and for a moment, he considered lying. But something in her gaze, something almost vulnerable, compelled him to answer honestly. "I fought for my people," he said finally. "For the ones who couldn't fight for themselves. For a chance at a future that wasn't controlled by someone else." Xelthara tilted her head, her mandibles clicking softly. "A noble sentiment," she said. "And yet, it was futile. You knew you would lose." "I did," he admitted, crossing his arms. "But fighting for what's right doesn't always mean winning. Sometimes it's just about standing your ground." Her gaze lingered on him, and he felt an odd tension in the air. "Your kind fascinates me," she said at last. "You cling to ideals that defy logic, that ignore survival. It is both admirable and infuriating." "And what about you?" he countered, surprising himself with the boldness of his question. "What do you fight for?" Her mandibles twitched, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a low voice, she said, "My people. My empire. They depend on me to lead them, to secure their future." Elias frowned. "By enslaving and destroying others?" "By doing what must be done," she replied sharply. "The survival of my kind is paramount. Your species would do the same in my position." "Maybe," he said, his tone bitter. "But that doesn't make it right." Xelthara studied him for a long moment, her piercing gaze making him feel as though she were stripping away every layer of his defenses. Then, to his surprise, she let out a low, almost mournful sound. "Perhaps you are right," she said quietly. "But it is too late for regrets." Elias didn't know how to respond. For the first time, he saw Xelthara not as the monstrous queen who had defeated him, but as a ruler burdened by the weight of her responsibilities. It was a strange, disorienting realization, and it left him feeling unsettled. The weeks that followed brought more moments like this, moments where the lines between captor and captive blurred. Xelthara continued to test his resolve, challenging him with tasks that seemed designed to break his spirit. Yet, each time he resisted, she seemed less inclined to punish him and more interested in understanding him. Their conversations grew deeper, delving into topics ranging from the nature of leadership to the morality of war. Elias found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, sharing stories of Earth and his own struggles as a soldier. Xelthara, in turn, revealed glimpses of her own past, of the wars she had fought to unite her fractured empire, of the sacrifices she had made to secure her people's survival. One evening, as they sat in the grand chamber, Elias found himself asking a question that had been nagging at him for weeks. "Why me?" Xelthara looked up from the glowing orb she had been studying, her bioluminescent eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean? Why keep me alive? Why make me your pet?" He hesitated over the word, his pride bristling. "You could have killed me, or left me to rot in some prison cell. Why go through all this trouble?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she rose from her throne and approached him. Standing over him, her towering presence as intimidating as ever, she said, "Because you are unlike any human I have encountered. Most of your kind cower in fear or lash out in blind rage. But you challenge me. You make me question things I have long taken for granted." Elias blinked, caught off guard by her admission. "And what if I don't want to be your philosophical experiment?" A faint smile curved her mandibles. "You may not have a choice, little one. But I suspect that, deep down, you are as curious about me as I am about you." He opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. As much as he hated to admit it, there was some truth to her words. He had spent countless hours analyzing her actions, trying to understand her motives. And though he would never say it aloud, there was a part of him that found her alien intelligence captivating. The days turned into months, and their relationship continued to evolve. Elias remained defiant, but his defiance was no longer driven solely by hatred. He challenged Xelthara not to spite her, but because he genuinely wanted to understand her. And in turn, she seemed to value his perspective in a way that both baffled and intrigued him. Their strange bond was far from simple. It was a dance of power and vulnerability, of hostility and mutual respect. And as the lines between captor and captive grew ever blurrier, Elias couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them, and whether the alien queen who had once been his greatest enemy might one day become something more. The changes in their dynamic didn't go unnoticed by the alien court. Xelthara's subjects whispered in clicks and hisses about her unusual attachment to the human warrior. The queen, who had always been unwavering in her dominance and decisions, now appeared more contemplative, more distracted. It was clear that Elias, her so-called pet, was at the center of this shift. Elias noticed it too. The way she would glance at him during court gatherings, her glowing eyes lingering just a moment longer than necessary. The way she sometimes deferred her punishments, even when he had been openly defiant. He still hated the collar around his neck and the power it symbolized, but he could no longer deny the complexity of their connection. He didn't know whether to be frustrated or fascinated. One day, Xelthara summoned him to her private chambers, an unprecedented event. The room was unlike anything Elias had seen before. It was vast and dimly lit, the walls pulsing with an organic glow. Strange, spindly sculptures made of alien materials adorned the space, and a soft hum filled the air, resonating in his chest like a heartbeat. Xelthara was seated on a platform that rose slightly from the center of the room. Her posture was relaxed, though her piercing gaze betrayed her ever-present intensity. She gestured for him to approach, and he did so cautiously, the collar's faint hum a constant reminder of her control. "You have lived among my kind for many cycles now," she began, her voice softer than usual. "Tell me, Elias, what do you think of us?" He hesitated, unsure of what she wanted to hear. "You're ruthless," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "Efficient. Driven. But not without purpose." Her mandibles twitched in what he had come to recognize as amusement. "A diplomatic answer," she said, "but not an untrue one. And what of me? What do you think of your queen?" Elias stiffened. The question was loaded, and he knew it. "You're complicated," he said after a moment. "You're a tyrant, but you're not without reason. You've shown me a side of you that I didn't think existed." Xelthara tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "And does that side frighten you?" He met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "It confuses me." She let out a soft clicking sound that might have been a laugh. "Good. You should be confused. I am a queen, a warrior, a conqueror. But I am also a being who carries the weight of an empire on her shoulders. Do you think it is easy to rule?" Elias shook his head. "No. But that doesn't justify everything you've done." Her eyes darkened, and for a moment, he thought he had pushed too far. But instead of lashing out, she leaned forward, her towering frame casting a shadow over him. "You speak as though you understand me, human. But do you truly? Have you ever made a decision that cost lives, knowing it was the only way to save more?" He faltered, her words striking a nerve. Memories of the battlefield flashed through his mind, of comrades he had lost, of civilians he couldn't save. "I've made hard choices," he admitted, his voice low. "But I never forgot the cost." "Neither do I," she said, her voice softer now. "Every life lost weighs on me, human. But I bear it because I must. My people look to me for guidance, for survival. To falter would mean their extinction." Elias stared at her, taken aback by the raw emotion in her words. For the first time, he saw not a conqueror, but a leader burdened by the impossible choices she had to make. It didn't excuse her actions, but it made them understandable. Their conversation lingered in his mind long after he returned to his quarters. The walls of the fortress, once so oppressive, now felt less like a prison and more like a world he had yet to fully comprehend. And as much as he hated to admit it, he found himself thinking about Xelthara, not as his captor, but as someone he wanted to understand. The turning point came on a day unlike any other. Xelthara had been summoned to deal with an uprising on a distant colony. It was a rare display of dissent among her people, and the queen was clearly unsettled by it. She summoned Elias to accompany her, a decision that shocked both her court and Elias himself. The journey to the colony was tense. The air aboard the organic vessel hummed with unease, and Xelthara was unusually quiet. When they arrived, the sight that greeted them was one of chaos. The colony was in ruins, its inhabitants divided between those loyal to the queen and those who sought independence. Xelthara approached the rebel leader, a towering alien with scars crisscrossing his chitinous body. The tension between them was palpable, and Elias stood by her side, his presence a silent testament to her authority. "Why do you defy me?" Xelthara demanded, her voice cold and commanding. The rebel leader hissed, his mandibles clicking angrily. "You have lost your way, Xelthara. You grow weak, distracted by the human you keep as your pet. We will not follow a queen who has forgotten her purpose." The word struck like a blow, and Elias saw Xelthara's posture stiffen. He expected her to lash out, to crush the rebellion with her usual ruthlessness. But instead, she did something he never could have predicted. She turned to him. "What would you do, Elias?" she asked, her voice measured. "If you were in my place?" He blinked, caught off guard by the question. "You want my advice?" "I value your perspective," she said simply. "Speak." Elias hesitated, aware that the eyes of the rebels and Xelthara's loyalists were all on him. "If you crush them," he said slowly, "you'll only breed more resentment. Show them mercy, and you might win their loyalty." The rebel leader let out a derisive hiss. Weak words from a weak species. But Xelthara raised a hand to silence him. She studied Elias for a long moment before nodding. "Very well," she said. "I will offer them mercy, but only once. If they betray me again, there will be no second chances." The decision stunned everyone, Elias included. It was a risk, one that could backfire spectacularly. But as the rebels cautiously accepted her terms and the tension began to ease, Elias saw a glimmer of hope in the chaos. Later, as they returned to the fortress, Xelthara spoke to him in a tone that was almost gentle. "You continue to surprise me, human." "Good," he said, meeting her gaze. "Someone needs to." For the first time, she smiled, a small, fleeting gesture, but one that spoke volumes. And in that moment, Elias realized that his role as her pet, her captive, was evolving into something far more complex. What that meant for him, and for her, he couldn't yet say. But he knew one thing for certain: their story was far from over. The days following the rebellion's peaceful resolution were marked by an uneasy quiet in the fortress. Elias could feel the weight of scrutiny from Xelthara's court as they watched him with a mixture of suspicion and disdain. The queen herself seemed unchanged outwardly, but he knew better. There was a subtle shift in her demeanor, a quiet tension that lingered in her interactions with him. It wasn't long before the whispers among her subjects grew louder. The rebellion's leader, though subdued for now, had sown seeds of doubt among the queen's advisors. Elias overheard their murmurs during court assemblies, their clicks and hisses betraying their unease. "The queen is too lenient," one advisor whispered to another, their translucent wings twitching with agitation. "Her fascination with the human clouds her judgment." "She grows weak," another hissed. "This pet of hers will be the ruin of us all." Elias didn't need to understand their full language to grasp the meaning behind their words. He was a threat to their perception of Xelthara's strength, a reminder of her decision to show mercy, a decision many of them clearly disagreed with. Xelthara, however, appeared unfazed. She continued to summon Elias to her side during court sessions, using his presence as a silent statement. Whether it was a display of defiance toward her critics or an assertion of her authority, Elias couldn't be sure. What he did know was that her reliance on him, however small, was beginning to change how he saw her. One evening, as the crimson glow of the twin moons bathed the fortress in an eerie light, Xelthara called Elias to her private chambers again. He entered cautiously, still wary of the strange relationship they were building. She stood by the large organic window that overlooked the sprawling alien landscape, her silhouette framed by the pulsating light of the fortress. "You seem troubled," he said, breaking the silence. She turned to him, her glowing eyes unreadable. "You are perceptive, human." He shrugged. "It's hard not to notice when the queen of an empire looks like she's carrying the weight of the universe on her shoulders." Xelthara let out a low clicking sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "The weight of an empire is no small burden. My people demand strength, yet they question my every decision. They see mercy as weakness, and they whisper of betrayal. They think you're losing your edge because of me," Elias said bluntly. Her mandibles twitched, and she inclined her head slightly. "Yes. They see you as a distraction, a liability. But they fail to see what I see." "And what's that?" he asked, crossing his arms. "That you are not a weakness," she said, stepping closer. "You are a mirror. You force me to confront my own flaws, to see my actions from a perspective I had long dismissed. It is unsettling." Elias studied her, his expression softening. "That's not a bad thing, you know. Leaders need to be challenged sometimes. It keeps them grounded." "Perhaps," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "But it is a dangerous game to play in my position. My people expect strength, and they will not tolerate anything less." He hesitated, then said, "Maybe showing them that strength doesn't mean cruelty is the challenge you need to face." Her gaze lingered on him, and for a moment, He thought he saw a flicker of something vulnerable in her eyes. "You speak as though you know my people," she said, her tone almost wistful. "I don't," he admitted. "But I know what it's like to lead. To make choices that haunt you." Her mandibles clicked softly, and she turned back to the window. "Then perhaps you understand me better than anyone else." The room fell into a contemplative silence, the hum of the fortress the only sound. Elias found himself grappling with emotions he didn't know how to process. Xelthara was still his captor, his enemy in many ways. Yet, in moments like this, she felt like something more, something he couldn't quite define. As time passed, the fortress became a place of uneasy stability. Xelthara's court remained divided, their trust in her shaken but not entirely lost. The queen herself seemed to navigate the tension with an unyielding grace, though Elias could see the toll it took on her. Their interactions continued to evolve, shifting from confrontations to something resembling companionship. She began to trust him with tasks outside the fortress, sending him to observe the rebuilding efforts on Valeria Prime and even to mediate minor disputes among her subjects. The collar around his neck remained a constant reminder of his status, but Xelthara's treatment of him felt less like that of a master toward a pet and more like that of an equal, albeit an uneasy one. Elias, for his part, found himself grappling with his own conflicted feelings. He still longed for freedom, for the chance to return to Earth and the life he had been torn from. But the thought of leaving Xelthara behind, of abandoning the fragile connection they had built, filled him with an unexpected sense of loss. The next major test of their relationship came in the form of an external threat. A rival empire, long thought dormant, launched a sudden and devastating attack on one of Xelthara's outer colonies. The news sent shockwaves through her court, and the queen immediately called for a war council. Elias was present, standing silently at her side as her advisors debated their response. The room buzzed with tension, the air thick with the clicks and hisses of their alien language. Xelthara listened intently, her expression unreadable, before finally raising a hand to silence the room. "We will not act in haste," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This attack is a provocation, but it may not be the full extent of their plan. We must be prepared for anything." Her advisors exchanged uneasy glances, their unease palpable. "And what of the human?" one of them asked, their tone sharp. "Will he play a role in this conflict as well?" Xelthara's gaze flicked to Elias, and for a moment, he saw something almost protective in her eyes. "He will," she said simply. "His perspective has proven valuable before, and it may do so again." Elias felt the weight of her words, the responsibility they carried. He was no longer just a captive, no longer just a symbol of her victory. He was becoming something far more significant, a bridge between two worlds, and perhaps a catalyst for change. As the council dispersed, Xelthara approached him, her towering figure casting a long shadow. "You have a choice to make, Elias," she said, her voice low. "You can continue to resist me, to fight against the role you've been given. Or you can embrace it and help me shape a future that neither of us could have imagined." Elias stared at her, his mind racing. He had always fought for freedom, for the chance to shape his own destiny. And now, standing before the alien queen who had once been his greatest enemy, he realized that freedom might take a form he had never considered. "I'll help you," he said finally. "But on one condition." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And what is that?" "That you start listening to me, not as your pet, but as your equal." Xelthara's mandibles twitched, and for the first time, she extended a hand toward him. "Very well," she said. "We will shape this future together." And with that, their story began anew, the path before them uncertain but filled with possibilities neither of them could yet comprehend. The alliance between Elias and Xelthara transformed not only their relationship but the course of her empire. Together, they reshaped its foundation, weaving compassion into its structure without sacrificing strength. Elias became more than a symbol of defiance. He became a trusted advisor, a voice for balance that earned him the respect of even the most skeptical aliens. Xelthara, once feared as a conqueror, began to be revered as a visionary leader who bridged divides that once seemed insurmountable. Over time, humanity and Xelthara's species forged a tenuous peace, one built on understanding rather than conquest. Elias, still bound by the collar but no longer enslaved by it, remained by Xelthara's side, their bond transcending the roles of captor and captive. Together, they proved that even the most profound enmities could give way to unity. Their story became legend, of an alien queen and a human warrior who defied their fates to create something greater.